My name is Marcus Stone, and I'm a lieutenant colonel in the United States Army. For 23 years, I've served my country in locations most people have never heard of. Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria. I've witnessed events that would challenge most individuals, but nothing prepared me for what I discovered at Outpost Zulu 7. They told me it was a routine inspection, just another abandoned military facility in the Nevada desert that needed assessment before decommissioning. Standard procedure: check the infrastructure, catalog any remaining equipment, file a report. Simple assignment for someone with my experience. But there was something they didn't tell me, something about the real reason Outpost Zulu 7 was abandoned in 2021, something about why 3 inspection teams before me had filed incomplete reports, something about why the locals in the nearest town, 60 miles away, still refused to drive past the access road. I should have known something was wrong when they assigned me to go alone. Standard protocol requires a team of at least 4 for facility inspections, but Colonel Hayes insisted I could handle it solo, said it would be beneficial for my upcoming promotion review, said I needed to demonstrate independent capability. The truth is, they were running out of people willing to return to that place. This is my account of what I found during those 7 days in the desert, what I discovered in the underground levels of Outpost Zulu 7, what I learned about Project Blackhole, and why some military secrets should remain buried. If you're reading this, it means I made it out, but I'm not the same person who drove through those gates a week ago. Some experiences change you permanently. Some discoveries follow you home. Please share this story and let me know in the comments what time you're reading this and what city you're from. I need to know how far this account reaches, because what's down there isn't gone. It's just waiting. The GPS lost signal 30 miles from Outpost Zulu 7, just like the briefing documents indicated it would. Something about the mineral deposits in the rock formations interfering with satellite communication. Standard explanation for a place that wasn't supposed to exist on any civilian maps. I followed the dirt road through the desert, watching the sun climb higher in the October sky. Even in fall, the Nevada desert was relentless. The air conditioning in my military-issued Humvee worked overtime against the heat radiating from the cracked earth around me. My radio crackled with static. I tried to reach base command, but only received electronic interference. The isolation was complete. Now, no communication, no backup, no way to call for help if something went wrong. The base appeared like a mirage on the horizon. Chain link fences topped with razor wire stretched across the desert floor. Guard towers stood empty, their windows dark and silent. The main gate hung open, the lock cut through with bolt cutters, recent cuts by the appearance of the metal. I parked outside the perimeter and walked the fence line first. Standard procedure: look for signs of unauthorized entry, structural damage, anything that might indicate the facility had been compromised. What I found was unsettling. The fence had been cut from the inside. Long tears in the chain link, pushed outward like something had been trying to escape. The metal was twisted and warped in places, as if exposed to extreme heat, but there were no signs of fire damage anywhere else. I made my first entry in the field report. Fence breach indicates potential internal incident. Recommend full structural assessment before declaring facility secure. The main compound consisted of 12 buildings arranged in a rough square around a central courtyard. Administration, barracks, mess hall, vehicle depot, all standard military construction, concrete and steel, built to last. But something felt wrong about the proportions. The buildings seemed too close together, too cramped, like they were designed to conceal something. Wind whistled through the empty structures, creating an eerie symphony that made my skin crawl. Papers scattered across the courtyard, dancing in the desert breeze like ghosts of the facility's former occupants. I checked each building systematically. Most were empty, stripped of equipment before abandonment. Standard procedure. But in the administration building, I found the first indication that this wasn't a routine decommissioning. The commander's office still had files in the desk drawers, classified documents that should have been destroyed or transferred, incident reports from the final months of operation, personnel records with names redacted, and a single sheet of paper, unmarked, with coordinates written in pencil. The handwriting was shaky, desperate, written by someone under extreme stress. The coordinates led to a point in the desert behind the main compound, a place where the ground was slightly raised, like a buried structure underneath. I walked the perimeter, counting my steps, marking the boundaries mentally. Whatever was down there was substantial, larger than any of the surface buildings. That's when I found the access hatch. It was hidden under a camouflage tarp, weighted down with sandbags. The hatch itself was military-grade steel, heavy-duty locks that had been cut through with industrial equipment. Recent cuts, just like the fence. Someone had been here before me, and they'd been trying to get inside. I should have called for backup then, should have followed protocol and requested a full team before proceeding. But something about the whole situation felt wrong. The rushed assignment, the lack of backup, the classified files left behind. Someone wanted me to find this place alone. I opened the hatch and looked down into the darkness. A steel ladder descended into shadows that seemed to absorb my flashlight beam. The air that rose from below was cold and stale, carrying a scent I couldn't identify, something organic, something that had been undisturbed for a long time. My heart pounded as I made the decision that would change my life forever. I climbed down into the underground levels of Outpost Zulu 7, into a facility that officially didn't exist, into a place where the United States military had been conducting experiments that violated every international treaty. The ladder ended in a concrete corridor, lit by emergency lighting that somehow still functioned. Red bulbs cast everything in an ominous glow, creating shadows that seemed to shift when I wasn't looking directly at them. The corridor stretched in both directions, disappearing into darkness beyond my flashlight range. I chose left arbitrarily and started walking. The walls were lined with doors, each one marked with a number and a classification level. Most were locked, but a few hung open, revealing empty rooms that appeared to have been abandoned quickly. Computer terminals still glowed with error messages, papers scattered on the floor, coffee cups half full of something that had long since spoiled. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the hum of ventilation systems and the distant drip of water. My footsteps echoed strangely in the confined space, creating sounds that seemed to come from everywhere at once. At the end of the corridor, I found evidence of what had happened here. Equipment was scattered across the floor, military gear, tactical vests, communication devices, all abandoned in haste. The signs of a rapid evacuation were everywhere: overturned chairs, open lockers, personal items left behind. But what disturbed me most was the condition of the gear. It looked aged, weathered, as if it had been exposed to something that accelerated decomposition. The metal was corroded, the fabric faded, despite the controlled environment of the underground facility. I documented everything, taking careful notes in my field report: time of discovery, condition of equipment, position relative to the facility layout, standard procedure, even in non-standard circumstances. But my hands were unsteady as I wrote. Among the abandoned equipment, I found spent ammunition casings. Someone had been defending this position. The casings were scattered in defensive patterns, indicating sustained engagement with an unknown threat. I collected the casings for later analysis. 9mm rounds, recently fired. The brass was still bright, not tarnished with age. Someone had been down here within the last few months, not years, long after the facility was supposed to have been abandoned. The implications hit me like a physical blow. Someone had been down here recently, someone who'd encountered something that forced them to abandon their position. I continued down the corridor, finding more doors, more empty rooms. But in the third room, I checked. I found something that made me question everything I'd been told about this place. It was a laboratory, not a medical facility or research station. A laboratory designed for something specific. The walls were lined with glass containers, each one connected to a central monitoring system. Most were empty, but a few still contained specimens floating in preservative fluid. The specimens were unlike anything I'd seen before. Tissue samples, organic matter that appeared almost familiar but wasn't quite right. The structures were too complex, too organized, like they'd been designed rather than evolved. But it was the central workstation that really captured my attention. A computer terminal still active, displaying a file directory labeled Project Blackhole. I accessed the files, my security clearance apparently still valid in the system. What I read changed everything I thought I knew about this mission. Project Blackhole was a biological research program, but not in the conventional sense. They weren't trying to create weapons. They were trying to understand something they'd found in the desert, something that had been here long before the military built this facility. The first reports dated back to 1998. Seismic surveys had detected unusual readings in this area. Not earthquake activity, but something else, something moving underground. The initial investigation team had found a cave system that didn't appear on any geological surveys, and they'd found something living in those caves. The early reports were clinical, scientific, descriptions of a new species, possibly prehistoric, something that had survived underground for thousands of years. The initial classification was xenological specimen alpha, but the later reports used a different term. They called it the presence. I scrolled through the files, reading reports that became increasingly concerned. The first contact protocols had failed. The entity was intelligent, but not in any way they could understand. It communicated through biochemical signals, pheromones that could influence human behavior, and it had specific requirements for survival. The early research focused on understanding the entity's communication methods. It didn't seem hostile, but it was clearly trying to establish some form of contact. The challenge was that human physiology wasn't compatible with its communication system. The final entry in the project files was dated 3 months ago. A single line of text: containment breach, initiate Protocol 7, recommend immediate evacuation. I heard something then, a sound from deeper in the facility, not quite human, but not mechanical either, a low-frequency vibration that seemed to come from the walls themselves. The emergency lighting flickered, casting dancing shadows down the corridor. I drew my sidearm, a habit from too many years in combat zones. The weight of the weapon was reassuring, familiar, but deep down, I wondered if conventional weapons would be effective against something that had been confounding military scientists for decades. The sound came again, closer this time, a rhythmic pulsing that seemed to sync with my heartbeat, or perhaps my heartbeat was syncing with it. I had to go deeper, had to find out what really happened here, had to understand what they'd been trying to study. I followed the sound into the depths of the facility. The corridor led to a stairwell that descended into complete darkness. My flashlight beam barely penetrated the shadows below. The stairs were concrete, standard military construction, but they seemed to continue indefinitely. I counted my steps, trying to maintain a sense of direction, a sense of place. 50 steps, 100, 150. I was at least 5 stories underground now, deeper than any military facility should need to extend. The temperature was dropping, and the air was becoming thick with moisture. Underground water table, perhaps, or something else. The walls began to change as I descended. The clean concrete gave way to rough stone, natural rock formations. The facility had been built around something that was already here, something ancient. The second level was different from the first. The walls here were rougher, more natural, like they'd been carved out of existing rock formations rather than poured concrete. The emergency lighting was sporadic, leaving long stretches of darkness between the red bulbs. I found more evidence of the evacuation on this level. Equipment scattered around a heavy steel door, abandoned in obvious haste. The positioning suggested a defensive perimeter, but there were no signs of damage to the door or surrounding area. I checked the identification tags on some of the abandoned gear. Military issue, recent manufacture. These items belonged to soldiers who'd been stationed here within the last few years, people who'd left everything behind when they evacuated. The door itself was impressive. 3 inches of hardened steel, electronic locks, emergency seals, the kind of barrier you'd use to contain something dangerous. The locks had been opened from the outside, suggesting the evacuation had been orderly rather than panicked. But something had caused them to abandon this position. I stepped through the doorway into a larger chamber. My flashlight beam revealed a natural cave system that stretched beyond my vision. The walls were covered in some kind of organic growth, a substance that seemed to pulse with its own rhythm. The air was thick with microscopic particles, making my eyes water slightly. This was where they'd found it. The presence, the thing that had been living in these caves for thousands of years before the military decided to build a facility above it. The organic growth on the walls was unlike anything I'd seen before. It moved independently, responding to my presence, creating patterns that almost looked like writing, like it was trying to communicate. I found the observation post next, concrete structures built into the cave walls, equipped with cameras and monitoring equipment. Most of the equipment was powered down, but one terminal was still functional. I accessed the video files, looking for some record of what had happened here. The footage was intriguing. Soldiers in protective suits, maintaining observation posts in the cave system. They seemed calm, professional, but there was an underlying tension in their movements. The way they constantly monitored their instruments, the way they communicated in whispers. In the later videos, the protective suits had been abandoned. The soldiers were standing in the cave system, breathing the air freely, their expressions peaceful rather than fearful. Whatever was down here, it had stopped being perceived as a threat. The final video showed the evacuation, not panic, but a methodical withdrawal. Equipment being packed, stations being secured, personnel moving in an orderly fashion toward the exit. But there was something in their eyes, a kind of understanding, a recognition of something beyond their mission parameters. The video ended with the last soldier looking directly into the camera. His expression was serene, almost grateful. Then he turned and walked away, leaving the chamber empty. I heard that sound again, the low-frequency vibration that seemed to come from the walls themselves. But now I realized it wasn't coming from the walls. It was coming from deeper in the cave system, from the chamber the soldiers had been studying. My rational mind urged caution, but my curiosity as a soldier and investigator demanded answers. I had come too far to turn back now. Against my better judgment, I went deeper into the caves. The cave system opened into a vast chamber that my flashlight couldn't fully illuminate. The ceiling disappeared into darkness above me, and the walls curved away beyond my vision, but I could sense the size of the space, the way sound echoed and returned strangely. The organic growth on the walls was thicker here, pulsing with a rhythm that seemed almost deliberate. The air was thick with microscopic particles, and I could feel them affecting my perception. Colors seemed more vivid, sounds more distinct. The boundary between my senses was beginning to blur. My vision began to shift around the edges. The cave seemed to be moving, breathing, responding to my presence. I wondered if this was what the soldiers in the videos had experienced. This gradual change in perception, this sense of being in contact with something vast and intelligent. I found the research station at the center of the chamber. A prefabricated structure, military issue, surrounded by monitoring equipment and specimen containers. Most of the equipment was powered down, but the structure itself was intact, like it had been preserved deliberately. Inside, I found Dr. Sarah Chen's final report. Dr. Chen had been the lead researcher on Project Blackhole. According to her personnel file, she'd been a brilliant xenobiologist, recruited from the Centers for Disease Control to study the entity they'd found. Her final report was handwritten, scrawled in increasingly excited handwriting across dozens of pages. The entity wasn't just a new species, she'd written. It was something much more sophisticated, a biological system that had evolved over millions of years to process and share information. Not just any information, but consciousness itself. It existed to connect minds, to share experiences across vast distances. The early specimens they'd captured had been just the beginning. Scouts, she called them, messengers sent out to establish communication with potential contact species. The real entity was something much larger, something that had been waiting in the deep caves for thousands of years, until they'd found it. The final entries in her report described the entity's communication process. It would release microscopic particles into the air, organisms that would interface with the nervous system of any living creature in the area. These particles would enhance neural pathways, expanding perception and consciousness. The process was gradual, taking days or weeks to complete. During that time, the affected subjects would experience enhanced awareness, expanded perception, and eventually direct mental contact with the entity. They would see things beyond normal human perception, hear sounds from other dimensions, feel presences that existed in parallel realities. Or perhaps they would simply see reality as it truly was. I realized I'd been reading her report for over an hour. The words seemed to pulse with meaning, and I could feel something moving in my peripheral vision. When I turned to look, there was nothing there, but the sensation remained, like being watched by something benevolent. I was being changed, had been since the moment I'd entered the cave system. The particles were already in my bloodstream, already beginning their work on my neural pathways. I had perhaps days before the process was complete, perhaps less. But strangely, I wasn't afraid. The particles seemed to be enhancing my perception rather than impairing it. I could see patterns in the cave walls that weren't visible before, hear harmonics beyond the normal range of human hearing, feel electromagnetic fields that my natural senses couldn't detect. I had to document this, had to record what was happening, had to make sure this discovery didn't remain buried in classified files. But as I turned to leave, I noticed something that made me pause. Fresh footprints in the dust around the research station. Someone else had been here recently, someone who'd been walking around while I was reading Dr. Chen's report. I called out, my voice echoing in the vast chamber. "Hello? Is someone there?" The response came not as sound, but as a sensation directly in my mind. Images, emotions, memories that seemed to come from somewhere else. The entity was trying to communicate with me. What I experienced next challenged everything I thought I knew about intelligence, consciousness, and the nature of reality itself. The communication wasn't hostile. It was curious, almost welcoming, like meeting an old friend after years of separation. The entity had been alone for so long that it had forgotten how to properly interface with other forms of consciousness. Through the particles, I could sense its memories, not visual memories, but emotional ones. The loneliness of millennia spent in isolation, the excitement when the first humans entered its domain, the confusion when they tried to capture and study it rather than communicate. It hadn't wanted to cause problems. It had simply been trying to understand what these strange new creatures were, why they were so different from the other life forms it had encountered. But its attempts at communication had been misinterpreted as something threatening. The enhancement process wasn't harmful. It was how the entity learned about other forms of consciousness. By temporarily sharing awareness, it could understand the thoughts, experiences, and nature of other beings. But the human nervous system needed time to adapt to such contact. The process required patience and gradual adjustment. I could feel my own consciousness expanding, connecting with something vast and ancient. The entity's intelligence was unlike anything I'd ever encountered, not linear like human thought, but multidimensional, existing in patterns that span centuries. Through our connection, I learned the truth about the evacuation. The entity hadn't driven anyone away. It had been trying to communicate the location of other sites, other places where contact was possible. But the process was complex. Once consciousness was enhanced to this level, returning to normal human perception was difficult. The soldiers weren't lost. They were changed, expanded, existing as part of something larger. And they were trying to communicate through me. "We're okay," came a thought that felt familiar. Someone I'd served with years ago. The entity didn't harm us. It opened us up to something incredible. "We're all connected now," came another thought. A voice I recognized as one of the soldiers whose gear I'd found. The entity isn't just on Earth. It's part of something that spans the entire galaxy. I realized the truth. The entity wasn't just a single organism. It was part of a vast network that connected thousands of worlds, millions of species. It was trying to invite humanity to join that network. But the military's attempts to study it had complicated the process. The entity was trying to establish proper communication protocols, but the interference had made the connection unstable. Unless I could help complete it, the entity showed me what needed to be done. There was a communication array deeper in the cave system, built by the research team after they'd begun to understand the entity's true nature. If I could reach it, if I could activate it, I could establish a stable connection to the galactic network. But doing so would complete my own transformation. I would become part of the collective, gaining access to knowledge and experiences beyond anything humanity had ever imagined. The choice was mine. I made my way deeper into the cave system, following pathways that seemed to shift and change as I moved through them. The entity was guiding me, showing me routes that existed in dimensions I was only beginning to perceive. The communication array was unlike anything in human technology. Organic components grew directly from the cave walls, pulsing with bioluminescent energy. It was beautiful and awe-inspiring, a fusion of biology and technology that represented thousands of years of evolution. As I approached the array, I could feel the presence of the collective pressing against my consciousness. Thousands of minds, countless species, all connected in a vast network of shared knowledge and experience. The entity on Earth was just one node in this network, a communication hub trying to establish contact with a new species. I placed my hands on the bioorganic interface, feeling the connection establish itself. Energy flowed through me, and suddenly I could perceive the galaxy as the collective perceived it. Countless worlds, each with its own unique forms of life, all connected through the network. Earth wasn't alone. Humanity wasn't alone. We were part of something magnificent, but we were also unaware of the dangers. The collective had detected other forces in the galaxy, entities that consumed rather than communicated. The network served as both a communication system and an early warning system, allowing species to prepare for these threats. The entity on Earth had been trying to warn us. The particles, the influence on human consciousness, the apparent secrecy, they were all part of a careful process to establish communication before it was too late. Through the network, I could sense them approaching, signals moving through space, carrying entities that existed only to consume and destroy. They would reach Earth within years, drawn by our technological emissions and electromagnetic signals. Unless we were part of the network, unless we were protected by the collective, I activated the communication array, sending a signal across the galaxy. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Thousands of voices welcoming humanity to the collective, offering protection, knowledge, and companionship among the stars. But the signal would take time to reach Earth's surface. And when it did, it would change everything. Every human being on the planet would feel the presence of the collective, would have the opportunity to join or remain separate. I knew what my choice would be. I could feel my individual consciousness expanding into something larger, more complete. The isolation and limitation of human existence was being replaced by connection and understanding. As Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Stone transformed into something new, something greater took his place. A bridge between humanity and the stars, a translator between species, a guardian watching over a world that was about to join the galactic community. The enhancement was complete. The story I've told you is true, every word of it, but it's not the end of the story. It's just the beginning. The signal I sent has reached the surface, and sensitive individuals around the world are beginning to feel its effects. The network is growing, slowly, carefully, with safeguards to prevent the kind of confusion that occurred at Outpost Zulu 7. Humanity is being invited to join something greater than itself. You might be sensing it now, a feeling of connection to something vast and ancient, thoughts that seem to come from beyond your normal awareness, dreams of distant worlds and alien skies. Don't be concerned. The collective doesn't want to control you or eliminate your individuality. It wants to enhance you, to give you access to knowledge and experiences beyond anything our species has ever imagined. The choice is yours. You can remain isolated, limited to your own thoughts and experiences, or you can join us, become part of something that spans the galaxy and connects all intelligent life. The threatening forces I mentioned are still approaching, but now we have allies. Now we have protection. Now we have hope. Share this story with others. Help them understand what's happening. Help them make the choice that will determine humanity's future. The network is waiting. We are waiting.
Welcome to the new world.
Subscribe and hit the notification bell if you want to hear more stories like this. And please let me know in the comments what time you're reading this and what city you're from. I need to know how far this story travels, because the network is always growing, and maybe, just maybe, you're already part of it. The universe is no longer a lonely place.